Super excited to have Jeremiah Lowin on with us. He's the CEO of Prefect. We also have Rich and Arcadia with us. Jeremiah, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It is our pleasure. We're super excited because Prefect has made some really interesting announcements recently. There was an acquisition of a company that happened. There's also a major product release that's been happening, and we want to get into that. And last time we spoke, Jeremiah, we were speaking to the negative engineering concept and how Prefect sort of changed the paradigm of how workflow engines work and how they address the negative parts of having to build out any kind of workflow. So that in and itself is a bit game changing. But there's been some big changes within your platform, which we're very interested in, and I know a lot of people will be. So let's talk first the acquisition that you made, and then let's dive into Orion, this new product offering. So tell us about this acquisition that you made.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me back. We were just chatting here a few months ago, it feels like.
Yes.
And now we got all this new stuff to talk about. So
yeah.
We did have an acquisition. It doesn't feel so much as an acquisition as much as a reformalization of a partnership that we had that is now just better and bigger and more powerful. A company called Slate Data, based in Chicago, which just some really top-notch data engineers and Prefect experts who we've worked with for close to 2 years now.
Nice.
And who had really become a constant factor in a lot of the work that we did. We had a really wonderful working relationship and had an opportunity to join forces and scale at exactly the moment that Prefect itself and our product is starting to hit some inflection points. You all are a big part of that story as well. Yeah. The importance of being able to ensure success in these critical deployments of our product, it's just more and more of a priority every day. And the opportunity to bring the Slate team in and have them, drop right into Prefect with a very similar work ethic, a very similar culture, a very similar set of objectives. It was too good an opportunity to pass up. And so that's what we put together, and just couldn't be happier with how it's going.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you got a good team. It probably expanded a lot of your capabilities in terms of being able to grow that customer base.
It absolutely did, and in ways that we wanted to be better, right? We recognize where we have relative strengths and not, and this was such a clear way to bolster ourselves in a way that we needed to be better, that they were expert, and now we're all more powerful as a result.
So let's talk Orion. Well, go ahead, Arcadia.
One more question on that, or maybe two. So would you expect that team to essentially help with some of the pre-sales activities or putting more documentation and samples together? What sort of synergies do you see coming as a result of that?
There's a variety. So there's a lot of post-sales success activation, a lot of sort of onboarding activities and assistance with deployments. And then a very exciting outcome of this is we're also really going to be spearheading our ecosystem integrations as a consequence of this. So whether that's commercial relationships that require special care or open source ecosystem expansion through our task library now, or as I'm sure we'll discuss, Orion now enables new kinds of subflow libraries and other sort of pre-built components. We're very excited about what we're going to be able to deploy there with the extra client-facing engineering skill set that we've now adopted.
Cool.
Awesome. So let's talk first about, let's talk a little bit about what was the impetus to thinking around Orion? What brought you to saying, okay, we gotta, because there's so much that's been either announced or ready to release or has been released about it, that is it a community thing, or was it internally thought up years ago and you said, this is where we want to take it? And tell us the story about how Orion came about.
Sure. It's very big. It's a very big idea.
Yeah.
We've only really scratched the surface here. Even what we've released so far, it's now available in an alpha release. But this conversation goes back a long time. I don't even remember that it had a specific catalyst where we said, "Oh, let's go rethink the world." as a company that only really exists because we have a product that really resonates with folks, we're constantly just asking, well, what could we do? What would we do? And I think you guys know this, but for the audience's benefit, we have this ban on what we call inertial thinking at the company, which essentially means that the fact that we're doing something is an insufficient reason to continue doing it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that we embrace anarchy and everything changes all the time, but it just means we must continuously re-examine the world and our understanding of it. And one of the easiest ways to sort of get people to agree with that is by pointing out that what you thought was true under one information set, if the information set changes, it's very unlikely that it's still true. And so the way of building and monitoring and constructing workflows that was natural, when we were prototyping Prefect 4 years ago, under the information set of now thousands of users and use cases and new modern data paradigms and partners like yourself, the idea that would still be exactly true is kind of hard to believe. And so there was a constant conversation, and in particular, this would have been myself and Chris White, our CTO, who were just sort of constantly, hey, what do you think about this? And that's a bad idea. What do you think about this? It's an interesting idea, but I don't know what we do with it. And a million and one conversations like that actually came together. The first time I remember that coming together was about a year and a half ago, sort of the spring and summer of 2020. Prefect was really starting to see that uplift and that inflection and that growth. And we were really starting to think, how are people using this? Because all of a sudden, it's an academic question. And so you can actually go and ask somebody and say, what are you happy with? What do you want to do more of? And then that data just comes flooding in. And rather than view the existing product and just kind of say like, oh, how could we rearrange the furniture on the deck here? We really said, well, what product would be the best thing to satisfy everyone's needs? And the exciting thing from our point of view is that Orion doesn't represent a different product. It's not solving a different problem. It actually has an extraordinarily similar set of semantics and APIs to how Prefect works today. But the major thing that we realized we could do is move much more of its engine, of its orchestration engine, behind an API and deliver the orchestration itself as a service, as opposed to the metadata store and API as a service while asking folks to deploy the engine. And I know I'm getting into sort of technical territory. We can deal with the outcomes of that first. The most important user-facing aspect of this is that we embrace this sort of tagline, code as workflows. And the idea is that for as long as I've been doing this, including in Prefect, we invite people to take their code and change it in some way to comply with the workflow orchestrator. That's how this works. And you build, a data structure called a DAG or some other way of communicating your instruction set to your orchestrator. And this is really, really, really annoying. There's very few things that is more synonymous with why people hate this whole thing that we do. I mean, we call this the negative engineering problem. There's nobody who wakes up every day and says, gee, I'm so excited to go schedule stuff. So we tried very hard with Prefect to always make that as easy as possible and as light as possible. But nonetheless, we are still building this data structure behind the scenes. And it was the realization that when people write code, and of course, our users are great at writing code. They're great at expressing what they want done. That code is already their literal best effort at saying what they want to happen in an orchestration context, in a workflow context. And so the more that we can take that code, which is its own data structure, right? It's its own data structure. It's not a DAG, and just translate that directly into the workflow context, the better user experience, the better developer experience that we can deliver. And so that very, very, very long conversation over probably 18 months is what finally resulted in the prototypes and insight and design and customer relationships where we said, okay, we know how to do this now. Let's go. Let's go start building a product.
So when, just to encapsize that, so people that would code these solutions before, they would have to take what they had coded and then say, okay, now how do I adapt this to a DAG model? Whereas now, how is it adapting that code to their, like I've built the code, I like what I've got, how is it that it's getting it there for us?
So maybe it's actually helpful before we talk about that. Let's just talk about sort of historically what this looks and feels like, and the compromises that people would have to make, and why you even care about this.
Exactly.
I like to go all the way back to Chrome. actually, let's forget cron. Let's go before cron. In fact, as a matter of fact, we might have talked about this in our last
in the
last time we had this conversation.
Yeah.
I do like to go back in time. If you had a script and you knew it would run perfectly, you don't care about any of the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
The best we can do is give you a nice dashboard for the fact that things happen, and that's a fine observability product. But if stuff's going to run exactly as you wrote it, you don't need anything.
Right.
Now you introduce cron. There's a bare minimum because you want things to run at 9 a.m. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Now your script's going to run at 9 a.m. Now, what if you had a second script, but you only wanted the second script to run if the first script succeeded?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if cron's the only tool you have, well, now, okay, we're going to run this one at 9 a.m. It takes about 10 minutes. I'm going to run this one at 9:30 just to be safe. And now I've got this huge like deadweight loss between them. And also, what if this one failed? Who's the arbiter of that state? And so we say, okay, now we need a sort of a central engine that's going to keep track of this. And the early versions of that used, YAML or other declarative languages. And when you're using declarative language, you have to say, this goes first, then I go, and then this other thing goes.
Right.
And that is the genesis of this DAG structure, which has now stuck around for 20 or 30 years, despite enormous advances in sort of the expressiveness of our tooling. And then we have tools like Airflow, which took that declarative syntax and they turned it into Python code, but you're still doing the same set of things. You're still saying, I have a task, set upstream, that's the one that came before, set downstream, that's the one that will go after me. It's this declarative syntax. And what Prefect did and what Orion just takes to the max is we say, no. We're going to take all the functions that you're already calling in your script and we're going to introspect them and we're going to keep an eye on how you call them and what you do. And as you're working with them, we will in the background build the data structure. And that is key. We don't ask the user, tell us in advance of everything. Tell us exactly what's going to happen. Because what if you want to have an if statement? And what if that if statement depends on the output of one of your tasks? You can put that into a DAG. You can. You can do anything, right? That's the joy of writing code. You can do whatever you want. But it's incredibly cumbersome to generate a DAG with branching paths that then recombine. So instead we said, great, write an if statement. Use the output of a task that came before, write the if statement, and then start working with tasks again. And the Orion engine is designed to, in real time, detect what your graph looks like and give you the tools to respond to it and work with it. And so
that's really cool.
that like instant dynamic online learning, if you will, is part of what explodes sort of what this product can do. Whereas if you are someone who is doing what we would call a DAG-like workflow, if you're doing E, then T, then L, it's a great product for you too, because the flexibility, the performance, the speed, we have to do UI, just the way you can interact with your data structure is enhanced, even if you yourself aren't going to take advantage of the more advanced use case.
Now, do you find situations where, because people code in some pretty bizarre ways and things like that. So do you find situations where it's hard to detect exactly, how this is going to get pieced apart and put back together and whatnot?
Of course. Of course. The more well-behaved your workflow is, the more powerful the experience that we can deliver will be.
Of course.
And this will be something that we're going to have some extensive documentation and guidance on how to know so let's take an extreme case. Your entire workflow is an if statement that checks if a random number is greater than 1 or less than 1. Okay. And it does completely different things that are also completely randomly generated. Our ability to deliver a meaningful, analytic over time, how long your thing typically takes to run, our ability to do that will be significantly compromised by the extreme dynamicism of this workflow. The amazing thing is it will work. Prefect will govern it. But for example, if a task is randomly generated and it's supposed to retry, there's some complexity. And so what if when we go to retry it, it doesn't get generated?
Right.
And so these are the types of problems that we've had to encounter and really think through. And the basic answer, the most important answer is, the more stable your graph, the more powerful the tooling we can deliver over it. But it is the fact that you can elect to take even one step away. Use that one if statement, use a map. You can now generate an infinitely long running flow that's just generating new tasks forever, for a health check, for monitoring, for whatever use case you can imagine, to pull stuff off a Kafka queue. It doesn't matter. there's really incredible things you can do. And the more well-reasoned and structured they are, the better the experience will be.
Yeah, I love it when applications or solutions come just a little bit closer to the user, because I mean, I it's like the ribbon. Remember the ribbon on Word? Like when the ribbon came out, it was like, yeah, this is just a little bit more accessible for people. And this is a good example of that. The solution is getting closer to the coder rather than requiring the coder to just read. And in addition to that, it's a lot easier for the coder to then see the output and then optimize the output rather than completely write based on a certain sequence demand.
Yeah, and all of this comes down to a really central idea, which is that this negative engineering problem, people don't like it. All right, our company's job, our company's mission is not to deliver the best workflow system. Our company's mission is to eliminate this problem however we can.
Yeah.
We're going to take as many swings at that ball as it takes to knock it out. This is a painful, bad experience when you encounter this type of problem. It's an all hands on deck kind of thing, because it's by definition, it's unexpected. And so the more that we can do to make people feel confident, feel happy, feel energized that their code is actually going to do what they wanted it to do, the better we are. And every single time that you require someone to think about the orchestrator, to think about the fact that they're using another tool to guarantee that's a cost that they're bearing. So we think about the problem with an insurance mindset. The cheaper insurance is, the easier it is to acquire it, the happier you are to have that insurance, because you know that you have that value prop in place. But the more, if an insurance agent showed up at your house every other day just to make sure that the house is like, imagine the hassle. And that's what it feels like using some of these legacy orchestrators. Like, they just force you to keep changing what you're doing and change your schedule to always be there, so that when the agent shows up, you can chat with them or whatever. I'm stretching this metaphor like well beyond where it deserves to be. But that's part of our goal here, is just make this easy, get out of the user's way, let them do what they're good at, and backstop them only if and when
so
necessary.
It's just an API call, and then what is it doing at that point once you call the API? Is it acquiring the code set and then deciding how to run it?
So in a really simple sense, it's basically a system that's sort of asking for permission is one way to think about it. So I've got my code, and I've got a really thin little client there that doesn't really know about orchestration. And let's define orchestration, because we're going to talk about it here. So what is orchestration? So to us, orchestration means it's the governance of a state transition. A state means what is the code doing? Is it running? Is it completed? Did it fail? Is it going to run in an hour? Entering any one of these states, that's not orchestration. That's just a matter of fact. That's how the world is. But leaving a state to go to another state, that's orchestration, because it requires some sort of coordination. Maybe only 6 tasks are allowed to run at once. So if you want to enter a running state and you're the 7th task, somebody has to tell you can't. Retrying is an orchestration where the task is going to think it entered a failed state, or somebody is going to think the task entered a failed state. An orchestrator who has a rule set is going to say, actually, no, you're back in a scheduled state. You're now awaiting a retry. You're going to run again. It's an orchestration instruction. And so how does this happen is now we have this grand orchestration engine that has a really transparent and observable rules engine that implements the 2 rules I just described and a million other ones. And each block of code, maybe it's Python code, maybe it's not, maybe it's some other client. Each block of code is essentially going to ask for permission or propose a state transition that it would like to have. And what's important is the nature of that state transition is sort of semantically up to the client code. So if the default set, and they make sense, you're a bit of Python code, you're about to run, so you let the orchestrator know, hey, I'm in a pending state, which means, become aware of me. And then the orchestrator says, you're good to go. You're pending. I see you. And now it says, great, I'd like to go in a running state now. And it says to the orchestrator, I propose I'm going to go into a running state. And the orchestrator goes, great, you're in a running state. We'll wait and see what happens next. Code runs successfully, and it sends back, I'm in a completed state. And the orchestrator goes, great. Now that it's a completed state, the orchestrator can go on and let the next task run. And so that's the vanilla case, a really easy call response. Where it gets very interesting is when that code fails. And it says, I'm proposing I'm in a failed state. And the orchestrator sends back, no, you're not. you're now awaiting retry because we have a retry configured for you.
Mm-hmm.
So don't fail. Don't go on to the next thing. Try again. Try again, by the way, in 17 seconds or whatever the configured time is.
Right.
That interplay, that's where the power of this comes from, because now it means that as a company, you can start to have policies about retries that are determined through the API. You can start to create complex concurrency logic, and you can get introspection into these things at scale without ever needing to deploy that logic to the end client. The end client only has to be responsible for actually running its code and a very, very, very simple call response to coordinate activity. So that's where and this goes forever.
You've got a number of finite state machines, and you're managing their state across the entire life cycle.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And the server in this case is ultimately the source of truth for those state machines, and the clients are just proposing state updates.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. Is the proposal? I remember because I did listen to the developer event that you did about a week ago, and I recall there was some discussion about putting it in. Is it as a cloud service that you're putting it in? Is that where Orion's going to live, or will it have optionality? One or the other.
It'll have a ton of optionality. So Orion, which, by the way, is a contraction of the word orchestration, just to emphasize how important this word is. Right? Orchestration, squeeze it, you get Orion.
More importantly, there's a reference to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That's a more important reference.
That's what Arcadia was hoping for.
That's exactly right. So Ford Prefect, his home is in Orion. It's Beetlejuice, but his home is in Orion. And so we're bringing Prefect home to Orion, which happens to be a contraction of orchestration. And by the way, when names work out like that, like
it was meant to
be.
Yeah, exactly. It's just too good to be true, right? It has to be. It has to be the right thing to do. So Orion's a contraction of orchestration. That's what it is. It is an orchestration engine, or maybe more broadly, the way we think of it, it's an orchestration environment. Very similar to how you would have a data environment or an execution environment. This is what we think is the first example of a dedicated orchestration environment. And it will interplay very nicely. It has APIs for both working with execution environments and APIs for working with data environments, for checkpointing all of your results into cloud storage and stuff like that. So Orion, this engine, this environment, is an open source product, and it's going to be the core of Prefect 2.0, which will be actually, as a matter of fact, its Alpha 4 will go out later today. So that's an open source forever. It will form the beating heart of our product line now, which will be both completely open source and self-hosted orchestration platform, as well as the next generation of Prefect Cloud, which will be a commercial scaled orchestration platform. Both, though, will be powered by the exact same Orion engine. And so really the choice is now, how do you want to deploy this? And what, there are things that we can do by virtue of full control of all infrastructure to deliver, very specific features in a cloud context that are more difficult to ship in an open source scaled context. But Orion will be the heart of both, and it will be.
I think it's very interesting. That offering is very interesting to me, because I would suspect that a lot of because there seems to be a lot of these either ETL players or database vendors that seem to have their own attempts at building workflow engines, and I feel like it feels like this would be a good gold standard to gravitate to if I was kind of running that, just so that it would be nice. I mean, I don't know that it might not be reality, but the specialization of these services is so critical to having them be used and successful. It's one of the annoying parts. You get like a database vendor that has an amazing database, but their workflow engine is just, it's so narrow, it's nice to have the gold standard across the board if you can make it.
Yeah, I think a workflow engine is only as good as the edge cases and complexity it can handle. Because again, if you believe, as I strongly do, that this problem only manifests in like weird and like unexpected ways, that's why you care about having this advanced and robust workflow engine. Now we see some basic form of orchestration or workflow engines popping up in all kinds of products, and it should, because for users of that product, it is very important for them to be able to say, I want this to happen at 7 a.m. and get that sort of basic insight. And if those products want to build on top of Prefect and not have to reinvent the wheel, more power to them. And life's going to get a lot better. But we do see a place for that, where Prefect as a more broad service comes into play. And again, back to this negative engineering idea, is those gaps, the negative space between tool A and tool B, or where we actually see a lot more lift is between team A and team B, or between organization A and organization B. That moment of handoff has no owner. So if in that moment of handoff, which is both the most likely place where something will go wrong, but also the place with the least visibility into what went wrong, because one tool is explicitly done with the process and another tool is explicitly about to start, our team, I should say, who governs that moment? And so by filling that space, even if every single team, if every single product in the world, and they won't, I assure you, because it's hell, but if every single product in the world had a brilliant scheduler, believe me, we have battle scars to show it, we'd be back in cron. We'd be back in tool A, you run at 9 o'clock. Tool B, you run at 9:30, because we're not totally sure if the handoff's going to take place.
Right.
And unless every tool on the planet wants to take up every pairwise integration on the planet, and I can assure you they do not, that is the opportunity for our negative engineering tool to come and fill every gap while leaving room for what we would call the hero products. So we don't view Prefect as like a hero product. We would love for people to build their data stacks around Prefect, but we understand that for the majority of our users, they have an objective and they have tools they want to use. And now it's time to bring Prefect in to build the platform around it. If we can make those hero products shine, we've done our job. That's the positive engineering. We're going to focus on the negative side. And, the stuff
it's a very negative world for you guys.
Addressing the negative world. To us, we look at Prefect as the sort of the power that gets applied to the circuit, because essentially without it, we may have the best circuit possible, but we've got to figure out how that data flows across that circuit. Jared, the idea that Jeremiah just expressed is something you've seen come alive in the Snowflake environment with data sharing. So we're sharing data, and it's easier for us to share data instead of passing flat files back and forth. We're now passing structured data, so that the team that's receiving it no longer has to extract it and load it and do all of those other activities. Take the orchestration now across teams, across organizations. I've completed the generation of that data, and now I'm giving you a signal. I'm raising the flag to say, I'm ready. Pick it up and start processing from that point forward. That is what we're expressing essentially with the ability to orchestrate across teams, across organizations. It just takes the data sharing idea beyond just the data sharing world.
Now, I remember from the event that you guys did that you're looking at expanding the supported code sets beyond Python and whatnot. Can you speak to that a little bit, where that's going and what kinds of other things will you be supporting?
Sure. So I think this is the whole sort of beauty of embracing the modern data stack, if you will. What makes it modern is not the logos. It's not the fact that we used to talk about Oracle and now we talk about Snowflake. It's the APIs. It's the fact that you can defer the decision of how to deploy it until later. And more as that business logic moves behind an API, I would argue that is actually the thing that determines if you are a part of the modern data stack. I very often we see these pieces about the modern data stack, and actually that's not at all quality. It's tools that would have been very at home in stacks 10, 20 years ago. They just have a gradient logo or whatever. It's considered modern. Modernness is an API. It's an API. It's the deferring of business decisions such that the business logic is adopted, in a just-in-time sense. And so this is why the choice of language can also be deferred now. But now, could we have done this before? Sure, we just rewrite all of Prefect in R or in Julia or in Java or whatever language people. And you're right to laugh, right? The volume, the size of that is crazy. We're not going to do that. But now, I already just explained to you that it's a thin client. It's a call and request. I just need permission, and that's very straightforward, especially, with a well-structured and documented API. So if you're running R code and you want to inform a central orchestrator, say, maybe one called Orion, that you are going to process it, go ask for permission to go into a running state. The separation now of the orchestration environment, which is going to say, go, you're in a running state, and the execution environment, which is going to do whatever it wants, which is to process the data frame and then respond, I'm done, I now would like to go into a completed state, works just fine, whether that execution engine, execution environment was Python-based, R-based, Julia-based, manual.
But I guess my question is, because you're interrogating, how to set up the DAG, supporting that many languages, is it add complexity to that process of supporting or being able to generate a DAG from that code base?
So the simple and not entirely true answer is no, it doesn't, because we focus on the API. So who cares what the clients are? But the very, very true answer is because we know that the success of this negative engineering product depends entirely on the developer experience. Yeah. Overextending ourselves by trying to, for example, I don't know. I know many different languages, but if someone came to me and was like, here's a language Jeremiah, that you don't know, can you build a client this? The answer would probably be like, yes, I can make the API calls, but I don't know the idioms. I don't know how somebody wants to express themselves in this language. And so the danger that we could have is if we implemented a Prefect client in a language that we were not expert in or not familiar with, we would be back in the exact same legacy world that we're now escaping, where we're forcing users to change the way they use their tools. And so that is where I don't know if it's a technical challenge as much as a product challenge, where we want to make sure we deliver this in the right way. Now, fortunately, I spent enough of my career writing R code. I was very involved in Julia in the early, those are very comfortable places for me as a data scientist to live, and for many on our team. So as we think about that product, we know what that feels like. And the wonderful thing about growing our community is we're already getting these pings for how people would like to see the tool used and other areas it would be deployed. With all that said, knowing the primary sort of persona, the primary person using our tool, Python is going to be our focus. Of course, because of the
data footprints and whatnot.
And for us, what's interesting at Intricity is we, over the last, I would say probably 5 years, have had a healthy debate. Some would call it a healthy war going on between the two communities. There is the Python community, the data science community, and the SQL community. So you've got set-based operations where you could express something in a merge statement in a push down optimization directly, ELT, essentially T happening in the database. And then you've got the procedural world where you've got pandas or you've got other data structures that you might want to operate on. And the two camps, especially over the last year, Rich, I think you can attest to this, have come together and recognized the strength of both. But we are teaching the data science community, and we've had a lot of really healthy debates about what do you do inside of R and Python and Julia, and what do you let the database do? Because obviously moving data is always an expensive proposition. And so the thing that I see happening, because we're able to now invoke things through Lambda, through serverless sort of functionality, we can leverage, and all of those tools, by the way, both SQL world and the data science Python world, if you will, do not have good orchestration tools. It's all manually hand coded. And so Prefect sort of helped in many ways bring the two worlds together so that they were no longer. And for us, that's an exciting change. We see Orion pushing that even further because, again, it simplifies the complexity that's involved in expressing that logic. You can express the logic without having to worry about the constructs of Prefect. And that's really the piece that's exciting to us.
Yeah, if we can get to a place where you bring your code, maybe it is SQL code, maybe via trigger, we that's our call response, right? There is no Python, it's just SQL. That's an amazing sort of ideal to hold in mind. And as is the nature of product design, those ideals are critical, and we just take steps towards them. By the time that's feasible, maybe we're talking about Orion 2 or Prefect 3, I guess is really what that would be 4 years, 5 years from now. But making steps towards that ideal is the critical thing. And I think when we think about like company and product visions, it's important for them to be big enough to be interesting, but small enough to be achievable. And I feel that Orion is a really interesting example of that. Orion feels and is a huge change in how people can use Prefect. But for our existing users, I think I think for those who have spun it up, it's a surprisingly small user-facing set of changes. Because more than anything else, we've moved where certain instructions are carried out rather than what instructions are carried out. And so that is, I think, when I think about what our team has achieved from a product standpoint, one of the things that I'm most excited about is this insight, which is largely gained from our users, from interacting with our community, but this insight that we can shift where things take place. That relatively minor redirect is what has created this explosion of utility and use case. And so that's very, very, very fun to see.
And one of the things that I also noted in that presentation you guys gave was a comment that someone had made about the number of workflows that you're able to process and how, how the UI is going to address some of that as well, in terms of being able to even envision, 100,000 workflows. I don't even know what that looks like. I'm curious what it looks like actually. But in terms of those changes, to add that along with this ability to kind of see the code, where are we at in terms of the number of workflows that can be processed within Prefect? Is it have you reached that number?
Every time that we think we're like, no one could possibly cross this threshold, somebody shows up and does it. I mean, and that has been the story of Prefect. And I guess that's a good thing, right? People are really pushing the tool. So for rethinking Prefect and for a brand new UI, we actually said one of the rules from some of the introductory screens that you can see today if you spin up the Orion UI, is we brought this principle of scale invariance. The idea being this UI must be useful whether you have one task or 1 billion tasks, subject, of course, to limitations of the infrastructure that you can bring to bear.
Screen.
Exactly. But that means, for example, today the timeline is very, it's one of the more popular things in the UI. That timeline is an ordinal count. So it shows the last, n runs. But if you've got 1 billion runs because you're running this massive hyperparameter optimization, what do you care about your last 100 runs? You don't know if they're significant or important. And so finding the right way to do this, okay, great, to aggregate them. But then what if you're the person who has three runs and they were critically important to you? We don't want to aggregate them. We want you to see them as individual things. And so this is one of the first times that we've started really laying in some heuristics and some ideas about not just showing data to people. I think I've lived too long in a world where orchestrators view their UI as just vomiting the database out at the user and like hoping that they figure out, find what they're looking for. And so the new Prefect UI is very much a study in trying to figure out what are people looking for, where are we delivering value, and getting them there, as easy as possible. So just for example, the dashboard of the new UI is designed that if you don't want to leave it, you don't really have to. Everything is filterable. And so our hope is that someone will come in and say, oh, I really want to know about our weekly ETL flows. And they'll type, ETL in the filter bar. It's all driven by this search box. And now they've got a dashboard for their ETL, and they'll save it and they'll come back to it at any time. You just click a little star and revisit any time. The next person comes in, they say, I only care about the workflows that failed in the last 7 days and that hit the database. And now they've got their snapshot of the world that they can take with them. And so Chris, our CTO, who you all know, gave us this instruction early on in this project. He said, the most important thing that we have to do here is we have to give people a way to map their expectation onto what actually happened. Yeah. And it's one of those things where, of course, when you say it out loud, of course, that's what anybody wants to do in this context, especially with a product whose job is to fulfill the unexpected, right? To be there when things went wrong that you didn't expect. If all we do is just show what's in the database, was it expected? Was this failure supposed to happen?
Right.
Was it, you don't know. So that guiding design principle, I think, is going to show up more and more and more as the UI keeps maturing over the next quarter. Or I hope it does. I hope folks will give us feedback on what they want to see there and what we can do to improve it.
Now, is that GUI on the online only, or is that it's both?
Both.
Okay, so both environments have it.
If you install the Prefect 2.0 alpha, you can spin it up right now.
See it right now. Okay. So another thing that you guys mentioned, and you have this on the site too, is that the flow never stops. So in my world of DAG thinking, You know, you have a beginning and then you have this end. You know, so this ability to generate loops and whatnot. I mean, how does that end up looking inside a Prefect? Is it you guys just manage that and it's like pixie dust on the back end?
Well, what's beautiful is instead of explaining to you like all the hoops we had to jump through to actually do it, the cool thing is we had to do nothing to do it because we no longer require you to tell us the data structure.
I guess that's true. That's
so
right.
it's actually really easy. What it looks like is while true, and then just call your tasks. And that's it. That's how you make an infinite loop. Yeah, it's beautiful. And so what could that be? That could be pulling events off a queue.
That's true.
Forever.
That's true. Okay.
That could be that could be pinging a pod or some service to make sure it's alive. That could be your health check, which is now reflected in the Prefect UI as red dots when there's a health check failure. Like once we go into this world where you can do all this stuff, it just becomes incredible. Now, of course, the moment we start talking about while true, we start talking about billions of tasks because we're in a very different world than batch scheduling. And that's why the UI needs to have a way to keep up with this, and the infrastructure needs a way to communicate what's going on.
Interesting.
So
good question. What is that development timeline looking like? Like, I know we're in the very early stages, right? Alpha just kind of announced release. How long is this? And maybe it's an infinite thing. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
It's gonna be quick. It's gonna be fast. It's gonna be real fast. I mean, you can see from the commit history that despite the months and months and years, that we spent a long time designing this thing, but it is coming out the gate fast. So over the course of this quarter, so it's an alpha release today. Mm-hmm. Over the course of this quarter, we will be prepping that 2.0 full release candidate. And so we're hoping for that sometime very early in 2022. We will release this. It will be sort of ready for people to really kick the tires and start doing in a production context. And then you'll see cloud gain compatibility with this new way of working in the second quarter, we expect, of 2022. So by midpoint of 2022, we're really expecting that we will have seen a full sea change and begun the transition. Now, for anyone who's using Prefect today, we're gonna have a very, very, very long sunset period. We're gonna make sure that this experience is top. We know how important this product is to a lot of people, and the worst thing we could do would be to sort of run around introducing changes that we haven't communicated and that we haven't helped people with. So between the long sunset, between the very minor user-facing API changes, and between our new friends from Chicago who have bolstered our ability to directly help our customers and users, this is going to be about as painless a process and upgrade processes I think has ever been.
Talk a little bit about this asynchronous capability that's come out, because we've been doing a lot of asynchronous work inside of Snowflake, and just because they've released that capability to do that in Python, and I am very curious on your asynchronous capabilities, if there's any marriage there that could be made between Snowflake and you guys.
There probably could be. It's a full like native support for async. As a matter of fact, and I give one of our engineers, Michael Atkins, I give an enormous credit for solving this problem in a really amazing sort of developer experience kind of way. Because it's a tough problem. Our entire engine is async. We wrote it async first because we knew we wanted to support that. We sort of really have enjoyed the experience of working with async tooling in the course of building, for example, Prefect Cloud and Prefect Server, our current platform offerings. And we didn't want to abandon that, because saying to somebody, oh, you want to run this in parallel, you must now go spin up stateful infrastructure. Right. A whole motivation of Orion is you don't even have to run an Orion server or a database to use it. We do that invisibly in the background if you haven't provisioned one. And so how do we like make this easy? Basically. Full async support. But what I think is cool about this developer experience is it's not a different async API. If you're working with async code, if you do async def on your task, now it's a code routine. Just await it if you wanna block on it or create a task for it. Async create task to run it in the background, just like you would with native async code. And you want to mix and match synchronous and asynchronous tasks, you go right ahead. The only thing you can't do, because Python doesn't allow it, is you cannot run an async task inside a synchronous flow, because again, code as workflows. If Python can do it,
yeah.
Prefect can run it, but not otherwise.
Right. And we've, Snowflake's async, we've done a lot with Python, and it literally just fires queries once they've compiled. It's just a cannon of queries coming out, and you have to put Humpty Dumpty together at some point if you're going to do anything with it. So, how do you guys do that? How do you put Humpty Dumpty together if you've got all this asynchronous stuff? Is it safe to say that we would need to put a stopping point after async is done and analyze what we've got and then move forward? Like, how do you, is there a merging, or is it just purely for use cases where, we're just going to run jobs and we really don't care about the downstream events?
No, not at all. So I think Python's approach to async can get some flack sometimes, but if you sort of deploy the tools that are available to you, you can do some really great stuff with it, and you can use it. It doesn't have to mean fire and forget. It doesn't have to have that semantic, right? And so we actually, to be honest with you, we do nothing special. It's same answer as before. We do nothing special. We just rely on Python's tools for this. So if you want to run, I think where people stumble with async is when they treat it as synonymous with parallelism, whereas it's really appropriate to think of it as concurrent execution. So if you've got a bunch of IO bound tasks where you're communicating, for example, with a data warehouse, async is great because you can fire them all off together and then wait for them all to be finished.
Right.
And then through standard Python semantics, you can now work with the results of them. You can put a natural gather in place, and now downstream of that, you can run what might even be completely synchronous code on the result of that. So for firing off queries to a database or data warehouse, I think that is like a perfect use case for asynchronous tasks. And then, you just wait for the result. You can even work with the data that comes out of them. It's just normal standard async Python.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, this is always, I've been wondering is DBT, do you see a lot of DBT users using Prefect? Is that a community you see a lot of?
Yeah, I really admire the DBT community. I think it's one of the, we have some idols as we build our own community and try to do it in a positive way. And they're certainly one of them. And we have a very close working relationship with the DBT folks. We'll be talking more about that later this year, as a matter of fact.
Cool.
But yeah, we have a ton of cooperation because this is one of those places where DBT is this amazing tool, and I think central to a lot of the stack, and has its own relationships, right, with different databases, data warehouses, and different downstream tools and users. And so we do see a lot of interplay in using Prefect to incorporate DBT and DBT's own orchestrated jobs into a wider, say, firm-wide or team-wide context. Stay tuned on that. We're going to have a lot to talk about.
We got we're scheduling our next event.
Yeah, a couple months we'll be back.
So it's almost like you're going from, the high-level job orchestration, and then DBT is kind of this lower-level transformation type code. Then you got the transformations themselves. Arcadia and I had just had a conversation about that one. So
we're doing some interesting things with Great Expectations and Jinja in particular in terms of templating. So there's a lot of interesting things that are coming out, and also metadata management. So stay tuned.
All right, we'll all get together and make a whole bunch of
Exactly.
Yeah, this has been super helpful. I'm really excited to see where Orion goes. It's got a lot of capabilities that I think are going to change the way people plan out these projects and plan and the level of effort that's required from people to do this stuff. Jeremiah, are there any questions that I haven't asked that I needed to be asking about Orion?
I mean, I could spend all day talking about Orion. It's very dangerous to ask me questions about Orion. I don't shut up about Orion.
What's the feature? What's the feature beyond the ones we've discussed? Are there any ones that we didn't discuss that are going to be, are going to really smack people in the face?
Oh my God, there's a million and one. I think the most powerful thing of all, and I'm definitely channeling Chris when I say this, is the most powerful thing of all is not one feature that we can deliver. It's how incrementally you can adopt the product. So the best example I have of this, if you have a script don't create any tasks, right? So let's live in the extreme version of this DAG-free world.
Sure.
Don't create any tasks. Just run your script. We can schedule the script. The script itself can become a workflow. It's Python. It's Prefect won't know and won't have observability into all the things that are going there.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we can schedule it. We can now create notifications over it. We can work with it.
Very cool.
And so now just one of those tasks is flaky and you want it to retry. Right at task over that function, retries equals 3, and you're done. Now everything in that script will continue to run as Python code except that one task. Because again, we don't need the full DAG. We just need to discover live. Now you've got retries on that task. And now you decide, oh, you know what? I actually want to schedule this so it only runs on the last business day of every month. Drop in a schedule now that does that. And you're very slowly taking steps only to the extent that you want to and only to the extent that Prefect is useful to you. So I think that is going to be the most that's going to be the most powerful adoptive thing here. Prefect POCs are already measured in days. I think we're going to take them back to seconds with this. I'm dead serious. And then I think for me personally, the most exciting thing is the removal is how interactive it is. Yeah. So you just call your function and it just runs and you can see it show up in the UI, and you don't have to run a server. You don't have to run a database. You don't have to build a Docker image. You don't have to configure a thing. You literally call a function that has the word @flow written over it, and now it's in the UI. And now you can see the history of every time you've done that. So that's my personal, it's interesting. Go to our Orion landing page. You can see about 100 new and really interesting features that we're introducing here.
Yeah, yeah.
But to me, by far the most powerful aspect here is how trivially easy it is now to gain any one of those features.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. I mean, I can see how you go down, from days to seconds or minutes. It could just simply because you could take the existing work that people have already done.
We have
do a pip install and then you add a decorator. I mean, that's as simple as that.
Yeah. And you have now an entire scalable orchestration platform running on your behalf, and that's amazing. So we have customers of Prefect today. Forget Orion. We have customers of Prefect today where the primary entry point was scheduling. My favorite example of this is, and probably always will be, the Washington Nationals. You needed a baseball schedule that could account for double headers. So their legacy tool couldn't hack it. So they used Prefect to get that flexibility. And that first deployment, nothing more than that, nothing more complex. But that being able to just drop in the pieces you need is so powerful. You don't have to buy into everything I'm talking about here. You don't have to believe in it. You don't have to. Why should anybody know what a DAG is? It's ridiculous. Just, do you want to schedule this or not? Here, schedule it. Go.
Yeah, you're ruining my next video. I'm going to talk about DAGs in my next. I have I do these pre-recorded videos, and then the next one is titled "What is a DAG?" So now it's now that video
Jared
is already useless.
It's
I've
funny.
explained that so many times over my career. I won't miss explaining that anymore. So.
Yeah, I know.
I will say I recently saw a fabulous use of a DAG structure as a product called Hex, which we're friendly with. It's a notebook tool, and they pretty much the same day we actually announced Orion, hey, no more DAGs. They announced a version of their notebook tool, which is completely it builds a DAG of the cells. And it's, first of all, beautiful and it's effective, but it just so emphasizes you need the right abstraction for the right purpose. When you're dealing with notebook cells and the principal confusion is that they can be run out of order and carry state in weird ways, a DAG is exactly what you need. And when you're working with code and while loops are literally part of the language, a DAG is the last thing that you need. A DAG is for after the code runs, not while you're writing. So
I reached out to a buddy of mine. I was like, DAG might be optional. He's like, oh, that would be great. Not to have to live there.
I signed up for an early beta of Hex and have been playing with it. So I will attest to the fact that if anyone is in the notebook world, certainly have to take a look at Hex. I think they've done a phenomenal job of
very cool product,
living up to the Intricity logo, simplifying complexity.
Well, very good. Got some great comments on, people saying they love some of the comments that everybody made. So, but Jeremiah, always super a pleasure to have you on with us, and super excited to see where this goes. Arcadia and Rich, thank you also. So we'll put this one in the history books, and Jeremiah, I'm looking forward to the next time we meet. I'm curious where where Prefect's going to end up landing once you guys move this all to the cloud and all of that stuff where it's a service and whatnot. I think there's really great opportunities ahead for you.
Well, thanks, team. Listen, you've had a front row seat to a lot of this work thus far. You're going to keep having the front row seat as we go forward. So just really appreciate all the time and interest. And try to have some good surprises for next time we chat.
Awesome.
Super.
All right. Thanks so much, Jeremiah. We'll catch you all later.
Much.